Hello everyone, I'm Darcy Bono, and in this video we're going to be looking at how to do this very simple but also very effective poison or acid technique. Now in this case I've used it on a Cruel Boy from the new Age of Sigmar Dominion box set, but I could certainly see it being used for anything from Nurgle to Skaven to Tyranids. So without further ado, let's get this party started. Now the first step of this process is so simple that I forgot to record it. All you're going to do is base coat with the brightest silver you have available. In this case I use Vallejo Silver Game Air. The only reason I use Game Air compared to its usual silver is just because it's smoother and thinner, but you can certainly use whatever very bright silver you have available to you. A comparable Citadel paint would be Runefang Steel. So now that your blade is looking nice and silvery after those base coats, we're going to be using Basilicanum Gray Contrast to calm it down a little bit. Now you can certainly use Nuln Oil. Basilicanum Gray is essentially just a more highly saturated Nuln Oil, but we'll cover what to do if you do intend to use Nuln Oil instead. So what I'm doing here is I'm applying just a little bit to my palette and a little bit of contrast medium. This is what thins the paint a little bit and allows it to flow instead of kind of congealing on the surfaces. And this is about the consistency that you're going to want your Basilica Gray to be. Now I absolutely love this paint over silver because it makes this nice iron color. It's got a little bit of brown in there, probably a little bit more so than Nuln Oil does. And as you can see, it saturates that bright silver very nicely and gives it a nice gross iron look. Now this is a very saturated brush. I'm going to be pushing what I'm putting on around quite a bit. There's really not much to this. The only thing to keep in mind is just don't oversaturate. You don't want these big splotches on your blade. However, don't stress out about it too much because what we're going to do in the final steps is going to look kind of greenish splotchy anyway. So just try and spread this evenly as you can, and it'll give you a slightly more realistic effect than fully just dunking it in this stuff. And we're also going to be keeping the blade, the tip of the blade and the edges. This brush has nothing on it, and we're going to be wiping it off the very tip. So that way when we go to apply our poison, it's going to be super bright. So again, there was nothing on the brush here. We're just kind of pushing this around so that we have a very bright part of the blade, and the rest will just be traditional metal. And one last thing while I just kind of even this out a little bit, for those of you that don't have Basilica Gray, that just want to use Nuln Oil because you're comfortable with it, or you just don't have access to Basilica Gray, you can do the exact same thing, literally the exact same process. It'll just take about 2 coats. So you would do this twice, essentially. So just once your silver's dry, apply your Nuln Oil, wipe it off at the tips and the edges, and then let that dry. And then just do it again, exact same thing. Another coat of Nuln Oil, wipe it off at the edges so a little bit of silver is showing through for you. And you should get a pretty similar appearance to what you see here. So now for the fun part, we're going to be using Tesseract Glow to create our poisons foundation. Now this is a very simple process. All you're going to need is a piece of sponge like you see here. The smaller the pores, the better. You can get them at almost any arts and crafts store for super cheap. And then all you're going to do is just dip it lightly into some Tesseract Glow, and using just a regular sheet of paper, you're going to blot most of that paint off until you get a nice speckled pattern like you see here. Now do not use glossy paper, otherwise you won't get an accurate depiction of what your pattern's going to look like. But once it looks like this, you're ready to put it on your blade. Now there's really not much to this. You're literally just lightly blotting the brightest portion of the blade, and the rest is honestly just a matter of personal preference as to whether you want the whole blade coated. If you want the little barge sticking out coated with some of it, that's fine. I generally will focus mine on the points that are the brightest, and maybe just a tiny bit of speckling here and there on other pieces, just so it's not quite so linear of a pattern. But this is basically all you do, and then we're going to do another shade of green over top just to give it a bit more texture. But this is our nice foundation for our poison. For this next step, we're going to be repeating the previous step, but in this case, we're going to be using Contrast Warp Lightning. And exactly as we did before, we're just going to get our sponge, dip it slightly into the darker green paint, and then blot most of it off until we get a nice speckled pattern. Next, we're going to be applying that just to kind of the center part of the blade, in between where the metal starts and the poison begins. This will give us a nice blotchy transition between the brightest green and then the rest of the blade. And with that final step, we now have a very sinister poisoned weapon. I do hope you enjoyed this video today. If you found it helpful, please feel free to leave me a comment. I absolutely love reading them. If you have any advice on how to improve, I would very much appreciate that as well, as I am not by any means a professional video maker. And if you especially enjoyed this video and would like to contribute to the production of additional videos as well as my artwork in general, I do have a Ko-fi link that is in the description of this video. Ko-fi is essentially just a digital tip jar, so if you like this content and would like to see more of it as well as just show your appreciation, feel free to check that out. So once again, thank you very much for joining me, and until we meet again, happy painting, everyone!